This is a brief analysis of Wilfred Owen's poem Strange Meeting. I have an edition of Wilfred Owen's poems first published in 1931, my edition, a slightly revised version from 1946. But the notes at the back says of Strange Meeting, this unfinished poem, the most remote and intimate, tranquil and dynamic of all Owen's imaginative statements of war experience, is without a date in the only manuscript seen by the present editor. And so we can assume that this is a fragment of a poem, that the poem was originally going to be even longer than this. It tells the story of a soldier who is transported from the battlefield to another plane of existence, which he discovers is hell. As he walks through hell, he sees a number of bodies, one of whom rises up and has a conversation, well, really just gives a speech, a homily, a sermon to the first soldier who finds themselves in hell. So let's have a quick look at it. The title, Strange Meeting, is an allusion to a poem by Shelley, Percy Byron Shelley, called The Revolt of Islam, which is a poem about revolution, and it's a poem about the frustration that people had with the French Revolution, and it's a poem about trying to find equality between people. And so Wilfred Owen's poem, Strange Meeting, alludes to that poem, The Revolt of Islam, because it's also about trying to find equality between people, and particularly people who are at war with each other. So let's have a look. The first line, it seemed that out of battle I escaped. I think probably seemed there deserves some attention from us, that perhaps he hasn't really escaped out of battle, that it just seems that out of battle I escaped, and there's a sense of discombobulation or just of confusion in the persona of the poem. Down some profound dull tunnel, we have the d consonants of that heavy D sound, that voiced consonant, down some profound dull tunnel. And you can also have a look at Wilfred, another fragmentary poem in that cramped and funneled hole by Wilfred Owen, to have a bit of a look at what he feels about, how he feels about tunnels. I think the send-off as well has a section where soldiers are walking down a dark alley towards some distant glory or some distant horror. He seems to have a bit of a running theme with tunnels and dark, long tunnels in his poetry. Long since scooped through granites which Titanic wars had groined. So we've got the sibilance of since scooped through granites which Titanic wars. The Titanic sunk in 1912, so this poem being written in 1918, a couple of months before Wilfred Owen's death, would have been fresh in his mind. It's also referring to the Titans of Greek mythology, in the same way that the Titanic ship was named after them. That this is some huge war that is that the Titanic wars, that they're eternal wars, that they're greater even than the gods, which is also a theme of Wilfred Owen's poetry, that war seems to be beyond the control of the Christian God as well. Wars had groined. Groined is a bit of an odd word. It's an architectural word that you won't use anywhere else in your life probably, and it just means to be made like a huge arch. That's all. I've highlighted it there in red because it goes with groaned. Because it matches up with groaned in the next line here. Groined and groaned, again we've got this slant rhyme which is common of a lot of Wilfred Owen's poems. Okay, so stanza 2 of the poem. Yet also their incumbent sleepers groaned. So groined and groaned has that slant rhyme, and you'll find that throughout the poem there's a fair bit of slant rhyme. This one's been highlighted particularly because it's yet another example of where Wilfred Owen in his poetry connects ideas across stanzas through rhyme, so that although there's a stanza break, there's still a connection between them. You could make quite a tenuous link, I guess, and say that although there's nationalities between the two soldiers, that there's still a connection between them, that there's still that universal human spirit within both of them. But I think that's going a little bit too far. We've got the euphemism of encumbered sleepers, that really it's the dead. Too fast in thought or death, so we're conflating the ideas of thought or death. To be fast asleep or to be fast in thought is to be fast in death, and that's the only place where we can think, or at least that's one way you could take the way in which he conflates those two ideas. And then we've got the plosive voiced alliteration of be bestirred. Then, as I probed them, one sprang up and stared with piteous recognition in fixed eyes. Got the sibilants of sprang up and stared, and then you've got the reference to eyes again, which are so important in all of Wilfred Owen's poems, that it seems to really be, again, that cliche, a window to the soul, for the figures in his poems, the object of his poems. Lifting distressful hands, not distressed hands, but distressful hands. They're being personified there, sort of being full of distress, as if to bless. So distress and bless, we've got that near rhyme again, that sibilance, consonants coming through. So to be blessed is to be distressed, and the blessing is about to come in stanza 3, where the second speaker of the poem gives a bit of a sermon. It's a simile as well, as if to bless. And by his smile I knew that sullen hall. So the sullen hall is hell, and we get the repetition of I knew, so that anaphora, or just repetition really. And by his smile I knew that sullen hall, and by his dead smile I knew we stood in hell. So the hall is sullen, perhaps personification there, or the atmosphere could just be a sullen atmosphere. A dead smile, we've got the contrast there, maybe even juxtaposition. I probably wouldn't go so far as oxymoron. And so the sullen hall is hell, and we've got the repetition of I knew. Alright, so moving on to the third stanza now, which is by far the longest stanza of the poem. You can see it there taking up most of this poem. It says, with 1,000 fears that vision's face was grained. So the vision, the thing that he's seen, the dead soldier who stood up before him, is it real or is it just a vision? Are we in some kind of dreamlike state, or are we actually dead? And there's 1,000 fears, so maybe a touch of hyperbole there. And the face is grained with them, so we've got that figurative language there as well, that the fear has been carved onto their face. Yet no blood reached there from the upper ground. I think we better highlight blood here, the symbolism of blood. He's uncorrupted by what's happened at war, which is kind of a little bit odd given that they're in hell, so we would expect that he would be corrupted, would be touched by what he's done in the life before he got here. Anyway, and no guns thumped, that onomatopoeia of thump, also a little bit of personification, I guess, or down the flues, think flue powder, Harry Potter, or down the flues made moan. So we've got the flues moaning, and we've got the alliteration of the smooth M sound there, that nasal consonant, Strange friend, I said. So a strange friend, again, we've got that sort of juxtaposition or oxymoron. A friend ought not to be strange. They ought to be familiar, I said. Here is no cause to mourn, so there's no need to be sad down here. None, said the other, save, except for the undone years. The hopelessness, okay, except for the fact that they were hoping for more in the future. The hopelessness, whatever hope is yours. We've got this hope and hopelessness coming in proximity to each other. It's not quite repetition, but it's repetition of the same root word, which is a thing called polyptoton. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. Polyptoton. A repetition of similar words. Okay, so we have that hopelessness and then hope. Whatever hope is yours was my life also. And so that this word also here making things inclusive, that the two soldiers, the two characters here, are very similar to each other. And he says, I went hunting wild after the beauty in the world. So we get that www, which we've said, the semi-vowel, that what sound, can become quite hypnotic, almost like a helicopter's rotors going around. It seems to imitate. It's this dizzying kind of sound that comes through. Again, we get the polyptoton with wild and wildest beauty of the world. That's what he went hunting after. That's what he tried to find. The word hunt with beauty, we've got a bit of a contrast there between those two, which lies not calm in eyes or braided hair, so not in the beauty of women, not in beauty that will pass away, but mocks the steady running of the hour. So something so beautiful that it mocks time itself, instead of time mocking the beauty. And if it grieves richlier than here. So the repetition of grieves there, grieves richlier than here. So yeah, we're talking about that this person in life had hope and was running after beauty, and not physical beauty that would fade, but beauty that was so beautiful that it would mock time instead of time mocking it. And if it grieved, it would grieve even richer than it does in this otherworldly plane. For by my glee might many men have laughed, and so saying that if I would have lived, if I was happy, people would have laughed along with me, and of my weeping something had been left. Okay, so that there was still some suffering left to do on earth as well, which must die now. So the weeping, the suffering, and also the joy, all of the things in his life must now die. So we're personifying those things, and the experiences of his life also die with him. So, I mean the truth untold, okay, the pity of war, the pity war distilled. So I think that line there in blue, at line 25, is really the crux of all of Wilfred Owen's poetry, which kind of makes sense why Siegfried Sassoon considered this Wilfred Owen's masterpiece, his ticket to immortality, or something like that he said about it. The pity of war, the pity war distilled. That seems to really be the crux of all of Wilfred Owen's poetry. And he's talking about the truth untold. We've got the the alliteration of the voiceless plosive sound there. I mean the truth untold. And to be quite honest with you, I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about, but it does seem that it's probably about poetry, and it's about the way in which poetry can reveal this truth to the world, the truth of how horrific war is. Now men will go content with what we spoiled. So now we're shifting from the past tense of these past great wars to the future. Men will go, and they will be content with what we spoiled. Again, that what dizzying sound. Nor discontent, boil bloody and be spilled. Okay, so spoiled and spilled having that near rhyme, and so those two things being connected to each other. Or discontent, boil bloody and be spilled. So people will either continue on with a wrecked world, a spoiled world, or they will be discontent and they will boil bloody and be spilled, that they will keep regressing into more and more wars. So it's a catch-22. There's no winning for the people left above on earth, in the earthly realm. They will be swift with swiftness, again, that polyptoton. Polyptoton? I don't know. Swift with swiftness of the tigress, the simile there, comparing the violence and the propensity towards violence to that of a tiger's. None will break ranks. We get this militaristic language in line 29 here, which will then be picked up down here to miss the march of this retreating world down here. None will break ranks through, though nations trek from progress, so that we're not going to be marching forwards. We're probably going to be regressing in some way. These two lines, courage was mine and I had mystery, wisdom was mine and I had mastery. There's a great resonance to them, that they sound beautiful. Courage was mine and I had mystery, wisdom was mine and I had mastery. The use of the pluperfect tense shows that now there's no mystery, now we have experience and there's no mastery. We know that we have been bested by the world. To miss the march, alliteration of that M sound, to miss the march of this retreating world. So it's not that we've trekked from progress so much up here, but that we're retreating, march, retreating, break ranks, all of this militaristic imagery, that the world has gone to war, or that war dominates the world so much. Into vain citadels, so the citadels there being personified as being vain, and that they're not walled, that they're easily overcome. Then, when much blood had clogged their chariot wheels, I believe this is an allusion to the Fairy Queen, or some other Spenser poem maybe. Anyway, you can look that one up. When much blood had clogged their chariot wheels, so we've got the metaphor here, and the chariot representing all of mechanized warfare, like from the Egyptians right down through to the tanks, or even to the nuclear bomb, I guess. This poem is portentous in that way. That blood has clogged their chariot wheels, that the mechanisms of war can't function because of how effective they are. Ironically, I would go up and wash them from sweet wells. So we've got this really a dual image here, that where they were going to wash clean the chariot wheels, and that we're not going to use them in war anymore, or perhaps we're washing clean the chariot wheels so we can use them again in war, so that they can be used again in war. So it harpers back to the catch-22 in lines 26 and 27, that either people will keep going on with life, content with a terrible life, or they'll be discontent and therefore cause more war. So we're either trying to wash clean the mechanisms of war, or we're washing them clean so that they can work again, so that they can do more killing. Anyway, even with truths that lie too deep for taint. So we're trying to wash them clean, this metaphor, and we're trying to wash them clean with truth. Okay, coming back to this idea of the truth untold. So perhaps it's poetry that's going to wash them clean. These poems that Wilfred Owen has written, and so many other war poets have written, that is going to reveal the truth of war, that will be able to wash away the stain of war, perhaps. I would have poured my spirit without stint. So that's a biblical allusion, that God pours his spirit out on those who are faithful. And here this soldier is saying that he would have poured his spirit out without stint. So it's making the soldier into this Christ-like figure. Or maybe the soldier is Christ, and this is Christ in hell when he's on the cross. Or maybe it's another possible interpretation of the poem is that it's the soldier talking to another version of himself, that this strange meeting is meeting him, his own spirit, and dealing with his own shadow or inner self in some way. Anyway, I've poured out my spirit without stint, but not through wounds, not on the cess of war. So he's saying that he'll pour out his spirit, but not onto the cesspit of war, not so that war can return. Foreheads of men have bled where no wounds were. I've seen a few interpretations of this line here in the penultimate stanza. Foreheads, the only other reference I can think of off the top of my head to Wilfred Owen's works is in Anthem for Doomed Youth, where the pallor of girls' brows will be their pall, referring to the forehead, the brow there as well. So foreheads of men have bled where no wounds were, alliteration of wounds were, and what you interpret that to be is up to you. Alright, let's just kick on to the final stanza. You'll notice here that I have not marked anything. I don't think it's particularly rich with technique, but let's just have a little look at it. I am the enemy you killed, my friend. Okay, so revealing the identity of this other persona, this other speaker in the poem. I knew you in this dark. We've got the caesura in the middle of the line. For so you frowned yesterday through me as you jabbed and killed. We've got that jabbed and killed. The diction becomes quite simple, and so we've gone from this very philosophical sermon and treatise about hope and about the future and mystery, mastery, and war through all the ages and what it means, to very simple ideas. I parried, so tried to dodge the attack, but my hands were loath and cold. So didn't want to parry and were already dead. Let us sleep now. And then we get the ellipsis at the end. Sleep and dark in that stanza perhaps being metaphors for death, and the soldier inviting the original persona of the poem to lie down and sleep with him in death. We do know that it's a fragment of a poem, so it's entirely plausible that it's just ... the ellipsis at the end, because there was more to come. But, there isn't more, and I think that's quite fitting, given that Wilfred Owen didn't live long enough to add whatever was coming next. But we are still left with quite an incredible poem, a very difficult poem, and a poem that really bears us thinking on it for a while, and thinking deeply, and thinking long and hard about thinking what we interpret it to mean.